Topic: Patience by Siddharth Sadat. It was not a normal celebration. The next day was Independence Day. This was the first time my family had actually and formally celebrated this day. My mother said this was the best time to show patriotism when it was needed the most. My driver, Khuda Baksh, who was 50 years old, was helping me with painting the walls of our house for the celebration. I asked him why he hadn't gone to his village in Bajor to celebrate the day with his family and friends. Must be difficult to travel back and forth for this job. Don't you miss your family? I do. I do miss them always, especially my son, he said as he moved the paintbrush back and forth on the wall. He seemed lost in an abyss of thoughts. My house was at the back of a barren, tawny colored hill. I had plastered the mud lining at the backyard for a place to pray. We also had a small well at a distance. My wife would get us water from that well in a round matka pot every morning before the morning prayers. Her name was Jamila. My son was a plump little darling. His name was Azan. He had a round face, dark curly hair, and hazel eyes. I blame my wife for making him eat so much, but she pampered him a lot because he was born 15 years after our marriage. Every time I used to go back, I would find him in his favorite light grey shalwar kameez. It was his way of expressing his glee at seeing me. Even on his last day, he was in the same. Last day? What do you mean, uncle? I cut him off. On his last day, he was wearing the same shalwar kameez to show his happiness at my arrival. At the time of the afternoon prayers, I laid my praying mat at the backyard and lost myself in prayer while my wife sent my son to play at the foot of the hills with his friends. As the evening fell, I asked where my son was, and my wife told me that Azan had not returned since afternoon. We searched the entire area. At one point, I told my wife to wait till I come back, as she could not walk further. As I reached the hill, I saw a few villagers covering the entire front of the hill. My friend Aziz dragged me away and said, Khuda Baksh, don't tell your wife. My friend, a drone has bombed this area. Your son. I could not hear further. The internal deafening noise of my sinking heart had made everything else hushed. Without thinking, I walked to the front of the hill, saying the name of my Lord. I could see the blackened foothill and the mob surrounding it. As I moved, I did not have to push the mob aside. They moved away themselves. And there he was, my darling, sleeping peacefully. The whole world had gone silent. I lifted my son's body on my old shoulders and walked back to where I had left my wife and laid my son on the ground. My wife ran to him. Then she went quiet. I screamed at her, shook her, beat her, but she would not say a word. Soon the women of the village surrounded her and tried to make her cry until she stood up and walked towards her home as if she was sleepwalking. I followed her in the same manner, with our son on my back. She lay down quietly without a word. That night I buried my love with my own hands. The next morning, when I went to wake my wife up, she did not wake up. I envy both of them as they are together, but I am alone. I do see both of them in my dreams, but that is not enough for a lifetime. I am too old to complain now or ask anyone why did this happen to me. Why was my happy little home destroyed? What was my son's fault or my wife's fault? Now I just live these last few years of my life only to pray to Allah that this does not happen to anyone else, and I await the day when I will meet them.